Hello, I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about loving one another. The Greeks have 5 words for love. Agape or agape, it means selfless love. Philia, like Philadelphia, brotherly love. Eros, passionate love. Storge, family love. And epithemia, which is a word that's used for the love of flesh, lusting after flesh. So those are 5 different words for love. But in English, we have one. I love God. I love my dog. I love my spouse. I love ice cream. We have one word for love, and it's supposed to suffice for all of our needs. In today's gospel, which comes from John, we are going to hear about Jesus' commandment, not suggestion, commandment, that we love one another. The Gospel of John, chapter 15, verses 9 through 17. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy might be in you, and your joy might be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends. If you do what I command you, I no longer call you slaves, because a slave does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you, and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. This I command you, love one another." The Gospel of the Lord. So there you have it. A few reflections ago, I gave you what I believe are 4 ways to look at our own lives to determine whether or not we believe. One, change. Has our life changed just since we said we were people of faith, we became a believer? Trust. Do we trust God? Number 3, do we forgive? And number 4, do we love? Do we love? There's probably nothing more important than loving. It's a commandment from Jesus. Jesus said in his day that we have 613 laws that Jewish people had, and he saw that they were focused more on the laws than on looking after each other, so he said there's 2. Forget the 2. God gave Moses 10. Moses gave to the Israelites, the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the 10. By the time Jesus came along, it was 613, and Jesus said, you're focused too much on those laws. There's 2. Love God, love each other, and all the other laws take care of themselves. So that's what we're called to do. But do we love one another? Do we love each other as Christ loved us? And remember, Christ spread both of his arms on that cross and showed his love for us by dying for us. What are we willing to do? How far are we willing to go for each other? I heard Pope Francis say recently that there were 3.7 million people who died in the first 4 months of this year. January, February, March, and April of 2020. Almost 4 million died. And he wasn't talking from COVID-19. He was talking the pandemic of hunger. People literally starved to death. Nearly 4 million people starved just in the first 4 months of this year. So extrapolate that out, that's going to be 12 million for this year are going to die from hunger alone. That's a pandemic, the pandemic of hunger. But we have many pandemics in our world today. We have the pandemic of war. We have the pandemic of terrorism, the pandemic of loneliness. Loneliness, that is such a sad, sad thing that people are dealing with. And it's so easily eradicated. But what keeps us from eradicating loneliness? The one thing that prevents us from loving: selfishness. There's only one thing that stops us from loving each other, and that is we get so self-absorbed. The reason God tells us to love is because he knows it's healthier for us. It's good for us. When we are focused on helping others, we take the focus off ourselves, which usually can bring us down and gets us mired in our own problems and our own negativity, and allows us to feel good because we're helping other people. It's for our own good that we're told to love each other. But this loneliness, in my 46 years of ministry, I've been to many funerals where nobody was there. Literally nobody in the congregation came to the funeral. And afterwards you might hear people say, well, that was so sad. He had a funeral and nobody came. I'll tell you something that's more sad, is he had a life and nobody came. You see, to come to the end of your life and to die and have a funeral where no one shows up means you probably went through a lot of lonely years where nobody showed up. Loneliness is a horrible thing that we can solve if we but start looking around and caring for the people that God has put in our life. There's a pandemic of selfishness which causes us to not love. There's a pandemic of abuse. There's abuse that's rampant throughout the world. There's sexual abuse, there's verbal abuse, there's spousal abuse, there's this kind of abuse, there's abuse that takes place, and it's a pandemic that destroys the lives and the families and kills every bit as many, if not a whole lot more people than COVID-19. There's the pandemic of abortion. How is abortion in any way exhibiting love? How can anybody in their right mind argue that to take an innocent life of this child growing inside the woman and destroying it and killing it is in any way connected to love and in any way honors the gospel reading today to love one another? There is a pandemic of abortion. There's a pandemic of spiritual hatred. People who are hated just for their beliefs. Look at how many people around the world are executed, are taken out and killed just because they have a belief that's different than others. There's a pandemic of racism. And yet what do we do about it? We have a government that keeps telling us that we've got a problem and that they have this program and that program to solve the problem. But what do their programs really do? I suggest to you that the programs that the government puts forward to eradicate the pandemic of racism creates more racism. Because what they do is they create subsets. They create programs, laws to help black people, to help Hispanics, to help Asians, to help Native Americans, to help the poor. What is that doing? It's creating subsets of all those groups, which by its very nature creates jealousy. It creates jealousy. It creates hatred by others, saying, why don't I get that? Why do they get that and I don't get that? The very problem, the very answer is creating greater problems. And why is it? Because they don't have love. There's not love. Now, it's not in Congress's or any government's interest to promote love or to inspire love, because they don't get elected by sharing love or inspiring love. They get elected by creating problems and then using it as a foil to say, I'm here to solve that problem. In the Old Testament, we read of Isaiah. He says, I've come as a repairer of the breach. But it doesn't say that Isaiah created the breach. It doesn't say that Isaiah stirred the pot within the breach to make it worse. And that's what I think our government does. They see a problem and they do what they can to capitalize on that problem. Racism is one of them. The immigration problem is another. If they wanted these things solved, they could have solved it years ago. But they're so busy using, in the case of immigration, or in the case of racism, these different groups, these subsets, as their pawns, moving them around a chessboard for their own purposes. And both sides are at fault. There's one answer, and the answer comes from God through Jesus, and it's to love one another. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. So what we're called to do is lose that apathy, lose that selfishness, and follow what the gospel says today, to love one another. It's a commandment, not a suggestion. This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.